millions of dollars. Do it for the carrots.
I did it for love and lip syncing and things like that.
She was the girl millions of teenagers wanted to be. Long brown hair, a calm smile, a voice that felt like it belonged to your own family. For 4 seasons, Susan Dey rode a painted school bus into American living rooms every week as Lori Partridge, the steady, dependable daughter of a make-believe pop group that somehow became a very real phenomenon. And then, just as the world was ready to write her off as a one-role teen idol, she reinvented herself as one of television's most respected dramatic actresses. But the story underneath the poise was never as simple as the smile suggested. Today, at 73, Susan Dey lives almost entirely outside the public eye, and the road that took her there says a great deal about what fame actually costs. This is her story. Susan Horlock Dey was born on December 10, 1952, in Pekin, Illinois, to Robert Dey, a newspaper editor, and Ruth Dey, a trained nurse. Her early years had the shape of a normal, stable American childhood, a working father, a nurturing mother, the ordinary rhythms of school and family life. That stability didn't last. The family eventually relocated to Westchester County, New York, where Susan attended Columbus Elementary School in Thornwood before the family settled in Mount Kisco. The defining wound of her childhood came in 1961, when Susan was only 8 years old. Her mother died. For a child that young, the loss wasn't just an absence. It reshaped the entire emotional architecture of the household. Grief at that age doesn't resolve neatly. It tends to settle into a person's personality, showing up years later as caution, as watchfulness, as a reluctance to need too much from anyone. Susan's father eventually remarried to a woman named Gail, and family life regained some structure. There was a new household rhythm, a stepmother trying to fill an impossible gap, and the ordinary business of growing up continuing around a loss that never really got smaller, only quieter. Those who remember Susan from that period often describe a girl who had grown more guarded, more careful, more contained than her age would suggest. Someone who preferred the edges of a room to its center. She continued through school, eventually enrolling at Fox Lane High School, where classmates recalled someone polite and reserved, more comfortable observing than performing, someone who didn't chase attention and sometimes seemed to actively avoid it. It's worth pausing on that detail, because in a strange twist of fate, the very reserve she developed as a coping mechanism for grief would soon become the quality that made her irresistible to a camera. The stillness that helped an 8-year-old survive losing her mother would, a few years later, read on film as poise. Susan didn't grow up dreaming of Hollywood. By her own account, acting wasn't a childhood ambition. If anything, she seemed to want quiet and normalcy more than any kind of spotlight. But in 1968, when she was 15, her stepmother sent a photograph of her to a modeling agency in New York. The response was immediate. Susan had a striking, unforced kind of beauty, clear features, an easy stillness in front of the lens, nothing performed or exaggerated. Agencies loved that her photographs never looked like they were trying too hard. Modeling work followed quickly. She appeared in teen-oriented publications and fashion spreads, building a modest but growing profile among agencies and photographers who worked with young talent. It was steady work, not stardom, but it put her face in front of exactly the kind of audience, young, impressionable, hungry for relatable icons, that a television network would soon be looking for. Around 1970, a photo of Susan reportedly made its way to producers at ABC, who were casting a new family sitcom built around a widowed mother and her musical children. The network needed someone who could read as wholesome to parents and appealing to teenagers simultaneously, a narrow, specific kind of charisma. Susan, with no formal acting training and almost no on-camera experience, walked into the audition and did something producers apparently weren't expecting. She underplayed it. She didn't push. She wasn't loud. She simply seemed real. That was enough. In 1970, at 17, fresh out of high school, Susan Dey was cast as Lori Partridge. The Partridge Family premiered on ABC in September 1970, and the transformation in Susan's life was immediate and total. The show followed a widowed mother, played by Shirley Jones, and her children as they formed a pop group and toured the country in a brightly painted school bus, a family loosely inspired by the rural-life Cowsills. Susan played Laurie, the piano and keyboard-playing older daughter, alongside David Cassidy as her on-screen brother Keith, along with Danny Bonaduce, Suzanne Cruff, and Dave Madden as the group's world-weary manager. The show was a cultural phenomenon in a way that's hard to overstate. It arrived at a moment when the country was worn down by war, political division, and social upheaval, and it offered something deliberately soft and reassuring. A message spelled out plainly in its theme song's refrain to "Come on, get happy." The fictional band also became a real one commercially. Their single "I Think I Love You" became one of the biggest selling songs of the era, and the show generated a wave of merchandise, fan clubs, and magazine coverage that turned its young cast into some of the most photographed teenagers in America. Susan, almost overnight, became a template. Young girls copied her hairstyle, her wardrobe, her calm expression. Publicists reached for comparisons to old Hollywood elegance to describe her. It was flattering, and it was also confining. America wasn't just watching an actress play a role anymore. It was holding her up as a symbol. And symbols, unlike people, aren't allowed to have bad days. What audiences didn't see was how demanding the work actually was. Cast members have described the show's schedule as brutal, long days, tight production timelines, and a level of public attention that made ordinary life almost impossible. Susan later told an interviewer that the strange psychological trap of young fame was feeling like an adult while still being treated, and still fundamentally being a teenager still trying to figure out who she was. That pressure eventually became physical. Susan has spoken publicly, including in interviews given later in her life, about developing an eating disorder during her years on the show, a period when the pressure to look a certain way on camera collided with a young woman who was already carrying unresolved grief from her mother's death. In one candid reflection on that period, she described how the disorder took hold. At the time, she said, nobody around her even had a name for what was happening, and controlling food became a way of controlling something when so much else in her life felt entirely out of her hands. It's a description that captures something many people who struggle with disordered eating recognize. The behavior isn't really about food at all, but about reasserting control in a life that otherwise feels like it belongs to everyone except you. None of this was visible to the millions of fans watching Laurie Partridge play keyboards and smile through another Friday night episode. Fame, at its most intense, tends to flatten a person into whatever the audience needs them to be. And for a while, Susan Dey was needed to be effortless, wholesome, and endlessly available, on set, in magazines, at public appearances. There was very little room in that arrangement for a teenager who was still working through the loss of a mother and trying to figure out, in real time, who she actually was underneath the character she played every week. The gap between the public image and the private experience is, in many ways, the central tension of Susan Dey's entire career. And it's a tension that would keep resurfacing, in different forms, 4 decades after the Partridge family went off the air. On screen, Susan and David Cassidy played siblings. Off-screen, the two became genuinely close as they navigated fame together. 2 young people thrust into a level of scrutiny neither had experience handling. Cassidy, in particular, was dealing with his own version of the same chaos, magnified by his status as a teen heartthrob. Screaming fans, relentless touring, and a level of sexualized attention that came with its own pressures. Their relationship has been the subject of a great deal of public speculation over the decades, much of it originating from Cassidy's own 1994 memoir, in which he wrote candidly about his history with Susan and their time together on the show. Susan, for her part, has generally declined to discuss the details publicly, maintaining the same instinct for privacy that has defined most of her adult life. What's clear is that the two remained connected in some form for years afterward. They were photographed together warmly at industry events well into the 1990s, even as the public nature of Cassidy's book reportedly strained things between them. When Cassidy died in 2017 from complications related to liver failure, Susan did not give a splashy public tribute or tell-all interview. She reportedly reconnected privately with his family to grieve, keeping that process, like so much else in her life, out of view. There was warmth on that set too, not just tension. Danny Bonaduce has recalled, including in interviews years later, a memorable moment when Susan, pushed to her limit by his on-set antics, poured a carton of milk over his head during a scene, with the rest of the cast reportedly egging her on because his behavior had gotten out of hand. It's a small story, but it says something real. Beneath the practice calm, there was someone who knew exactly when enough was enough. The Partridge family ran until March 1974, ending after 4 seasons and 96 episodes. Susan had already begun testing the waters beyond the show, making her film debut in 1972 in the airline thriller Skyjacked alongside Charlton Heston. But once the series ended, she faced the challenge that has derailed countless former child and teen stars. Everyone in Hollywood knew her face, but only as one character, convincing casting directors and audiences that she could do something else entirely would take years. Throughout the late 1970s, Susan worked steadily to broaden her range. She took on darker, more difficult material, including a television movie in which she played a young mother whose psychological struggles begin endangering her own child, about as far from Laurie Partridge as a role could get. She appeared opposite William Catt in First Love, took a guest role in Barnaby Jones, and in 1978 played Jo March in a television adaptation of Little Women, a production notable for pairing her with Eve Plumb, another actress inseparably linked to a different iconic 1970s TV family, the Brady Bunch. That same year, Susan married talent agent Lenny Hershen, and the couple had a daughter, giving her a private life that existed entirely apart from her public image, even as the marriage itself would not last. Into the early 1980s, though, the industry still struggled to see past Laurie. Susan co-starred with Albert Finney in the science fiction thriller Looker in 1981, joined the primetime soap Emerald Point NAS from 1983 to 1984, and in 1986 took a striking, image-defying role in the film Echo Park, playing a struggling actress who takes work as a stripper delivering singing telegrams. It was a clear, deliberate swing away from her old image. But the role that would finally change everything was still to come. In 1986, producers Stephen Bocco and Terry Louise Fisher were assembling a new legal drama for NBC called L.A. Law, built around the lawyers, staff, and personal entanglements of a fictional Los Angeles firm. They wanted performers who could feel messy and human, not polished television archetypes. Susan was cast as Grace Van Owen, initially a Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney and later judge and law partner, a character defined by intelligence, moral seriousness, and real professional authority. She also changed her look for the part, trading her long brunette hair for a blonde bob, a visible signal that this was not a continuation of anything from her past. L.A. Law's pilot aired on September 15, 1986. It struggled initially in its Friday night slot before NBC moved it to the network's valuable Thursday lineup, where it became a genuine hit. The show ranked among the Nielsen Top 30 for its first 6 seasons and eventually won 15 Emmy Awards, including 4 for Outstanding Drama Series. It tackled subjects rarely addressed head-on by network television at the time: capital punishment, abortion, racism, homophobia, sexual harassment, HIV and AIDS, domestic violence, and gave its characters real weight within those stories. Grace was never reduced to a love interest. By several accounts, Susan actively pushed back against story directions that would have defined the character primarily through romance, insisting instead that Grace's authority and convictions be treated as the point. The recognition followed. Susan won a Golden Globe Award for the role in 1988 and was nominated in each of the following 4 years, ultimately earning 6 Golden Globe nominations across her career. She also received 3 Emmy nominations for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series in 1987, 1988, and 1989. For a woman who had entered the industry at 17 with no formal training, being measured against television's best dramatic performers was its own kind of vindication, proof that the industry which once saw only Laurie Partridge in her had been wrong. Susan's personal life also entered a steadier chapter during these years. In 1988, she married television producer Bernard Safransky. By most accounts, their relationship offered something quieter than the industry around them, a home life built around ordinary things, away from cameras. That stability mattered, because the wounds from her younger years hadn't simply vanished with professional success. The eating disorder that had taken hold during the Partridge family followed her into adulthood. In 1993, Susan told a reporter plainly that she had not fully overcome it, describing it as something that had shaped much of her life and stressing that recovery from an eating disorder isn't something a person can manage entirely alone. It's a rare moment of Susan speaking candidly about an ongoing struggle rather than a resolved one, and it underscores something important. Even at the height of her professional acclaim, working on one of television's most acclaimed dramas, she was still fighting a battle that had started when she was a teenager under a different kind of spotlight. She has also spoken about attending recovery meetings for alcohol dependency during this period, and about how deeply violated she felt when details of a private recovery were leaked to tabloids. For someone who had spent years learning to protect herself through careful silence, having a private, painful process turned into gossip fodder was more than an inconvenience. It confirmed exactly why she had learned to guard her personal life so tightly in the first place. Susan left L.A. Law in 1992 after 6 seasons and 126 episodes, a longer run, notably, than her original stint on The Partridge Family. She later explained that she left when the role stopped offering her anything new, a rationale that says something about how she approached her career more broadly. Where the industry often rewards people simply for staying visible, Susan seemed far more interested in knowing when a piece of work had stopped teaching her anything. She moved into the sitcom Love and War from 1992 to 1993 and continued taking selective television and film roles through the following decade. She briefly reprised Grace Van Owen for an L.A. Law television movie in 2002, and in 2004 appeared in 2 episodes of the NBC drama Third Watch, appearances that would end up being her final professional acting credits. There was no farewell tour, no dramatic retirement announcement. She simply stopped taking new roles. By then, Susan had spent more than 3 decades in an industry that had followed her from teenage fame through hard-won adult respect. She had weathered typecasting, an eating disorder, tabloid exposure of her private recovery, and the public airing of a deeply personal relationship in someone else's memoir. And still, The Partridge Family kept running in reruns, introducing new generations of viewers to a 17-year-old version of her long after the real woman had moved on. Shirley Jones has spoken about her disappointment that Susan chose not to fully participate in Partridge Family reunion events over the years. But Susan, by most accounts, held that boundary firmly. She had learned, the hard way, how quickly public affection could turn into a sense of ownership over someone else's life. Susan and Bernard Safransky have reportedly lived for years in Andes, a small town in upstate New York, far removed from the entertainment industry's day-to-day churn. In one of her rare interviews from the 2010s, she spoke warmly about helping organize a local Battle of the Bands event to support musicians in her community, a modest, low-key kind of involvement that fits the pattern of someone who prefers contributing quietly over being celebrated publicly. That doesn't mean she stopped caring about acting. She has said in interviews that she still misses it, describing the loss in the same breath as some of the most significant losses of her life: her mother, her childhood home,